You will not believe the latest twist in the Iran war after President Trump says he wants to clear the Straits of Hormuz through brute force. You will not believe the story we're about to bring you on the new podcast, Next Gen Politics, an independent podcast that is going to be explaining policy, going to be telling you about how politicians are changing the way that our country is ran through policy, through thinking, through marketing, etc., and show you what the different political parties, the politicians, and how the different countries are run through our new Explainer series and through our new podcast that will be going through all of the news in terms of the UK, the US, the world, predictors, elections, debates, you name it, we'll be covering it here on this new political podcast, Next Gen Politics. So stay tuned for anything politics related. We will be uploading constantly on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you get your short form content, we will be uploading, and we hope you enjoy over the duration of this podcast, hopefully for years to come. Right, let's get straight into it with the major story. The Iran war is developing greatly. The Straits of Hormuz, President Trump says he wants to take the Straits of Hormuz by direct force. He's sending the Marines to the Middle East, and he's looking to kind of reopen it, I guess is the essence of the word. Reopen it and make sure that the oil prices calm down. He wants to clear that and get the oil flowing again to avoid a global recession. Obviously, the oil price has been about $100 a barrel over the last kind of 2 weeks since this conflict started. It peaked at $119 a barrel, and analysts think it could go to £150 a barrel, which would be greater than the 2008 financial crisis. That would be a really big moment, hence why Donald Trump announced that the US is lifting some of the sanctions on Russia regarding oil on Thursday. He did this to ease prices. Volodymyr Zelensky, understandably, was pretty furious with the president about this decision because they've still got an ongoing war that's lasted 4 years in Ukraine, and Trump's just decided to go in there and just kind of give them a good deal. He's also sending in the tankers. USS Tripoli is departed Japan on Friday with 5,000 sailors and Marine Amphibious Ready Group, which is part of their kind of task force, I guess, to defeat the Iranians on land, on water, after these tankers have been under fire from Iran over the last kind of coming weeks. Also on this topic, President Macron is in talks with the Iranian Supreme Leader, with the President, with that administration, this new administration in Iran, over letting French ships come through with some kind of deal, with the insides of that deal yet to be released. And the USS Tripoli will join the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald Ford, which are already in the region after all of these strikes. It's important to remember that all of these strikes and all of these kind of agreements to get the Strait of Hormuz is all to avoid a global recession, not the strikes, but all of the kind of the oil debacle and everything to do with that, all to kind of ease the tensions of our economy. We've seen stocks fluctuate constantly over the last week or two. We've seen futures stocks kind of be really crazy. Volatility stocks rose significantly, the likes of which we've never seen before, really. Trump says the US strikes obliterated Iranian military targets. The main one I want to talk to you about today is Kharg Island. I have here about Kharg Island. It's Iran's mail export terminal. Trump described it as totally obliterated. And this was about Friday, Thursday. He warned he would strike oil infrastructure if Iran interrupts global shipping. This came after Iran, obviously, they launched their missile drone attacks on the US and the Allied facilities. We saw in the UK, we saw Cyprus, our naval bases in Cyprus and Akrotiri being attacked by the Iranian regime. We've seen all over the Middle East. You've seen in Israel, Iraq, Dubai in particular is what we're going to go on to when we get into our world section of this podcast, and we're going to kind of see that this does not directly just affect Israel, America and Iran, all of the allies, even if they're not supporting this war, such as Keir Starmer not giving the UK support to Trump with this, Trump calling Keir Starmer not dealing with Winston Churchill, but despite us not kind of agreeing to this, we're still getting involved in this, and I think that's a really damaging thing for all allies that kind of object to this war, such as Germany, for example, don't particularly want war. Friedrich Merz has made that very clear that he really doesn't want to get involved with this whatsoever. But they're at risk. They haven't got many kind of overseas bases, but their economy is at risk. Everybody in the world is affected by this, and this might the infrastructure and the economies will be hit greatly. Even if you're not part of this, the general global economy will be struck greatly by this. and we're going to see that over the next kind of week or two. It might not just be a Gulf War, it might be the start of something way bigger than that, and that's something we need to take into consideration greatly. Now I want to get into now the UK politics, because this isn't just about Iran war. I want to say to you basically also, we have lots of different sections of this podcast which we'll see on our graphic screen, or you'll see it down here before every podcast starts. We have the UK politics section, which they're talking about Peter Mandelson and Rachel Reeves. There's a big debacle at the moment about the oil and about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. US politics, we've got the Texas Republican Senate primary, which happened last week, but there's lots of developing stories regarding how the two candidates, John Cornyn and Ken Paxton, are going at each other. We've got the Iran war, obviously. We have the latest kind of US Treasury and Federal Reserve figures about job growth and homelessness and infrastructure and kind of unemployment rates. We've got Congress can strike down the Chagos deal that Keir Starmer has developed. That's all coming up. We have the world, we have the war developments, obviously. The US-China trade deal might be at jeopardy. We have Nepal had a shocking political upset the other day, and then we've got a couple of other topics. We have the winners and the losers of the week, which is it's in the title really. The winners in the parties and the people, and then the losers of the week. There's been a lot of stuff happening last week. We've seen the Green Party, Gorton Denton by-election, which we'll be covering over the next kind of 20-30 minutes, which you will listen to wherever you're listening to this or watching this. We have the numbers of the week, which is a really interesting section describing the statistics, key statistics, and key stories and stats that really change the way we're doing stuff. We have the predictions of the week, which will be emphasising and giving an insight into what we could see over the next kind of coming weeks. And we have a missed story to end us off about a Florida mayoral election that may have changed the way that Florida may vote, and maybe not so much a Texas kind of stronghold the Republicans thought they had. So that's a really interesting thing to watch. There's tension also between the UK and the US, as I mentioned earlier, between Keir Starmer and Donald Trump. We should be going into that as well. And then obviously in the next episodes, if it has any comments or questions or reviews from any viewers watching this or listening to this, we will answer those at the end after the mystery section. But right now we're going to get into the UK politics section. So we're going to start this UK section with Donald Trump versus Keir Starmer. So we saw about a week ago now, I think it is, Donald Trump mocked Keir Starmer, saying he's no Winston Churchill we're dealing with here. I think he was speaking to Friedrich Merz in the Oval Office when that quote came out, and we'll probably see a picture of that on the screen right now. The reason for this obviously is because the UK refused to join in on these strikes with the Iranian targets, and they didn't give up Diego Garcia. They didn't let that happen. Any of the strikes happened from Diego Garcia, our base, and we also got the Chagos deal. We're going to talk about that in the next section in US politics. Starmer's response is a typical Keir Starmer response. It's kind of, in general with him, he's not giving a full proper opinion. He's kind of, with the way that he's brought the Labour Party to the centre of politics, he's almost kind of given a nothing answer. He's a bit absent kind of in his views, and we've seen that with his response. He says, the special relationship is in operation right now. We are emphasised on sharing our intelligence and making sure our diplomacy is our number one priority. That's what he said. It's a typical Keir Starmer answer, not kind of giving us anything. It's not really doing anything to kind of ease tensions or create more carnage. It's kind of just there, and that's kind of what I think why he's got such low approval ratings in the UK and kind of across the world in general, because he's kind of a nothing person. He's a bit absent kind of in his views, whereas you have someone like Nigel Farage or kind of like a David Cameron back in the day or whatever. They're making the headlines, they're controlling the stories, whereas Labour, it feels they're catching up on the stories. They're having to respond to the stories instead of making the front pages. They're making the front pages for the wrong reasons as well. They haven't helped themselves, as we're going to talk about in a minute with Peter Mandelson. But yeah, not Winston Churchill we're dealing with, that's what he said. Nigel Farage warned of risking the Atlantic Alliance, but polls show, which we'll go along to later, that Brits mostly oppose the strikes. It's a 49% against versus 28% support, and then there's a kind of 30%-ish that abstained and think that there's not really a real opinion that they feel on this. It's a leadership test for Keir Starmer. You know, we've got only 2 months now to the May elections, and it's really important that he can kind of take any political win possible and any kind of domestic division over this, so kind of over any domestic division over foreign policy is not going to help him at all. And 2 months away, 7th of May, local elections, it's a real kind of referendum on Keir Starmer's premiership, and if he gets any of this wrong, it's really going to affect his chances of staying in the office for more than 2 months. And I've seen some scathing articles in newspapers today about these elections and kind of how this really is a major turning point for Keir Starmer. We already thought that he was unpopular, but this could raise it to a whole new level. I'm going to quickly go over the Gorton Denton by-election as well, because despite this not being during the last week, it was a bit longer than that ago, I think. It's a really key moment, and it's really important because it's a major, major thing for Hannah Spencer to win the Green Party. If you haven't watched her maiden speech in House of Commons, please do. It's really important. It's a really good speech as well, going back to her kind of working class roots. So she won with a 40.7% vote share. We thought it was going to be quite close between her and Matt Goodwin, the Reform candidate, the GB News presenter. We thought it was going to be closer than it was, but it turns out it wasn't, 28.7%. Labour came third. I don't think I've got their figure on me right now. Angelica Stoichi, they brought the big guns out. They brought Lucy Power to campaign, Andy Burnham, despite him being denied the place during this by-election. He still went out and supported Angelica Stoichi, but that was no good. They came third place by, I think, about 25%. The Conservatives about 600 votes, Liberal Democrats 500 votes. I think the Conservatives only had about 400 more votes than the bloody loony raving party, whatever they're called. It's very funny the way. I mean, we never knew that Conservatives never do well in Gorton Denton, up in the north, up in Manchester, but that really shows that nobody's going to trust the Conservatives at any kind of electorate yet. The polls might show they're increasing a tad, but they're still behind Reform, Greens, Labour, etc., especially with the rise of the Greens now, which we're going to discuss in the coming episodes. It's a quick reminder as well, we will be discussing the 2026 midterms very, very soon. We'll be discussing the rise of the Green Party, the rise of Reform. We've got lots of kind of one-off podcasts, as well as these regular week-to-week ones that we're coming to you wherever you get your podcasts, wherever you watch your videos, so stay tuned for all of those. But the important thing here, back to the Green candidate Hannah Spencer, this was a key thing. Once we've had discussions about sectarian politics, we've seen in the papers and in the news that there was kind of family voting, and they were kind of encouraging every single Islamic person to vote, and the men were encouraging the women to vote, etc. All these kind of claims. I think Nigel Farage sent a couple of letters to the Electoral Commission about this, and that's really important. The key message, however, though, is this was a kind of fight against, a revulsion, I guess, of the Labour centrism. It's an attack on the billionaires after Zach Palensky. I mean, since he's taken over as leader of the Green Party, the polls have taken off, because he is that kind of guy that could just he's an exciting thing, because before the Green Party, you didn't know their leaders at all. We knew they stood for trees and stuff, but he's kind of brought them off that electorate. He still cares about climate change and net zero, making sure that we are energy efficient for the future, energy self-sufficient, I should say. But what he's done is kind of opened them up to a wider electorate. He's opened them up to a larger group of people that could vote for the Green Party. You know, they've taken some of the more socialist or the left-wing voters off Labour, and maybe off the Democrats as well, to the Greens, and maybe some kind of other people that wouldn't know, the swing voters, I guess we'll call them, they're changing as well to the Greens, because they're offering something new. It's exciting. The last 16 years in politics haven't been great. David Cameron was okay, especially the last kind of 10 years in particular. It's been really bad, and there's been no change whatsoever. And so that's kind of why you're seeing the rise of Reform, obviously, and that's why we've seen this kind of uprising. But it's a direct attack against the billionaires, we should say, and again, tax the rich kind of narrative. But the Labour's leadership's under fire considerably, especially after there was all this debacles, the Mandelson, the Lord Doyle, the everything, which we'll be discussing shortly. It's just another thing. Trade union boss Andrea Egan said Starmer was reaping the electoral consequences of moving right. This result is historic in becoming the Greens' 5th Westminster seat, and it illustrates the growing public anger on the cost of living and immigration, and it could empower those on the left of Labour to rebel. Labour insiders admit the loss means the party can't say we're best placed to beat reform. And this really matters. This entire, and not the only first bit was by that trade unionist, but the whole thing in general, that they're not getting anybody, they're getting everybody off Labour, they even some get reform, because people are kind of going, now it's Greens or reform. They're getting the people off reform and instead they're going elsewhere, and it's really what is happening here. So I'm going to put a picture up on the screen right now. It's the Chelsea team around the centre circle with the referee in the middle. It's absolutely bizarre. I'm putting a picture on this screen right now. I know this is a bit of change of politics, but this could be one of the craziest things I've ever seen in the Premier League. Going back to the politics now, so I've got my news channel running in the corner, but wow, that was bizarre. No, but that really matters. It signals the further fragmentation of Labour politics in particular. There's a big divide now. Tony Blair could unite the right of the Labour Party, the kind of blue Labour, and the left. Towards the end, maybe not. But Keir Starmer doesn't have the kind of charisma and the talent as a lawyer to do so. And we're seeing that with all these kind of debacles. Another thing we're going to talk about in this UK section is the Mandelson appointment scandal deepening. The new government documents released by Downing Street this week, titled the Mandelson Files obviously, further reiterates that senior officials have warned Keir Starmer about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. This is a damaging new thing that has been released about Peter Mandelson, in particular about Keir Starmer. This is another thing about appealing to an electorate. This is really not going to help anything to do with Keir Starmer and trying to get any Labour votes in the mid-term elections, I guess you call it, the local elections. It's a massive reputation risk. That's what it said, a massive reputation risk to appoint him as the US ambassadorship. Normally these aren't political kind of decisions making people ambassadors, but Keir Starmer, he removed the woman, I can't remember who it was, we'll put her on the screen right now. They removed that woman and went for a political appointment of Peter Mandelson. It was a good decision, I think, because Peter Mandelson, obviously now in hindsight it's a terrible thing, because we didn't really know at the time about what that meant, but at the time it sounded good because he was respected at the time, other than being fired as business secretary, which nobody really remembered. It was nearly 15 years ago, I think, at the time. But he had the ability to kind of garner support and hope and kind of garner the relationship between America and the US together. And I think he spoke quite well with Donald Trump, actually. Conservative MP Alex Burkhardt, who is kind of Kevin Badenoch's kind of de facto deputy, blasted the Starmer's claim of ignorance, beggars belief, and yeah, I mean, this scandal, when you think it ends, it just keeps going, and really, you just think, when can it end? When will the drama stop? When can it end? When will it end? When is the next thing going to be released? Because it's bound to happen. There's bound to be another thing in these Mandelson files or another batch of Epstein files that's going to get released. But the most shocking thing of this, I think, not about Starmer's judgment, yes, that's still shocking, and yes, it's eroded the public trust in the administration, but for me, the most shocking thing here in this is that the person that he appointed as his Director of Communications, Lord Doyle, he's now actually suspended from the Labour Party last month under investigation after it was found that he campaigned for a child sex offender. That's bad in general, and that really, I don't even know how you can appoint someone, because that was known, I think, at the time as Director of Commission. This vetting process done by Labour in Downing Street is not effective enough. But the thing is, Lord Doyle was mates with Peter Mandelson for 20 years. They know each other for 20 years. They met at public events, even especially during the vetting process. They met at public events. And it was Morgan McSweeney and it was Lord Doyle who were doing the vetting, and they had met Peter Mandelson and they were kind of, not befriending him because they'd already known him, but they were kind of, it wasn't really a proper vetting process. And it's just kind of this whole thing about how you can have someone that's friends with the person vetting that person. It's kind of like a kind of a family thing, kind of your mum's vetting you to do a job. You know, it's shocking, especially someone that has, you know, even as being sacked as business secretary, it's not great, it's not terrible either, but it's the kind of thing that you would have looked into more deeply. Why did this happen? And all this stuff that's now being released about the Mandelson files was there at the time. I mean, it absolutely beggars belief. I might be saying some of this stuff wrong, but it beggars belief about how this can happen. And the final thing I want to discuss quickly here about Britain is about the UK council elections and about the U-turn. So Steve Reid, who is the Housing Secretary, I think, and he's also the local community secretary at the same time. He took Angela Rayner's job, yes, I remember. So they originally scheduled for May 2026. They will go ahead. They're meant to be delayed by a year to 2027, partially because of the cost. I mean, the elections cost. Like, we got our council tax in the post today, and of our council's £50-odd million budget, about £3 million of that is spent on democracy and elections. And that is crazy that much money can be spent on elections. I still think they should have been held. It's just about how we can kind of reduce the money. I mean, we're not as bad as the Americans in Britain are kind of spending billions of dollars on elections, etc. Although we are starting to break some of those records now. But it's the general that they weren't happening. Nigel Farage applauded the reversal as a victory for democracy. Obviously, he's going to say that because he is going to benefit the most from this. Keir Starmer derided the chaos in government. This episode emerging in mid-February as to concerns about Starmer's stability after a series of policy flip-flops. That's what Keir Starmer said. Because obviously it was 30 local elections. It was, closer to me. There was a mayoral election. There was our council elections for our county council that were being delayed. I think there was about 30 local elections that were proper, that were being delayed. It is kind of stopping democracy, and it's making sure that there is fair and timely elections, because these people need to be held accountable. They need to be elected by their constituents and regularly. Even if it's like a premiership position, there is still an election every couple of years, every 4 or 5 years. In kind of Congress, it's every 2 years, and every Senate, it's every 6 years. There is a kind of process, and this needs to be maintained. Forget about any kind of updates to constitutions. This is the one thing that needs to stay the same, and fundamentally that's a good thing that has come back. I'm glad it's been struck down in court, because that's a big thing. And finally, I'd say about the energy prices. I expected that Chancellor Rachel Reeves is going to consider targeted support for the most affected households. Wholesale gas prices have jumped over 68% week on week since this conflict started, and the government's really under pressure kind of to shield families from further bill shocks, because prices are already increasing crazily. The cost of living is rising, wages are stagnant, and growth is stagnant, as we'll see kind of in this US figures and the UK figures as well. I want to say the economy flatlined from the months of January and February. I want to say we can get a statistic like that on screen now to demonstrate that. It's important that the government's economic competence and kind of fiscal strategy just before spring is held to account. It's making sure that we're protecting the most vulnerable in our societies, and it's making sure this targeted energy support will benefit people, because it's all good and well saying we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We've heard that over so many years. We're doing this to really target these people and make their lives better. But does this stuff actually get done? This is a real test to make sure it does get done and make sure this happens. I know we're waffling on for a little bit about these UK issues, but it's really important, especially Peter Mandelson, especially the Gorton Denton by-election. These are crucial moments in the UK to make sure that our democracy is safe, and that we're making sure that people in vulnerable in society are protected. I want to also raise one more thing about the UK, and I'll read the headline from this. Petrol bosses accused Rachel Reeves of inciting abuse. Now this is a kind of rising story about kind of petrol bosses. So the original quote from Rachel Reeves, inciting violence on staff after Reeves accused the sector of rip-off prices and exploiting the current situation in the Middle East to make excess profits at customers' expense. The Treasury and Labour ministers are being accused of inflammatory, incorrect and abusive incidents. This is a rising story, obviously, and it's kind of developing over the coming days, so we'll probably be seeing more of that probably in the next podcast we'll do. Right, now the first thing we're going to discuss here in this US politics section is the Texas Senate race. Now, obviously we have loads of Senate seats and obviously all the House seats up for election, but the Texas race is arguably the most important in the nation. It will decide probably the Senate control, if the Democrats, are going to do what they think they're going to do in the other states, in Michigan, in Wisconsin, not actually Wisconsin's not up for their hit, but Georgia, North Carolina, Maine, all these states where Graham Plattner, John Ossoff, I can't remember the governor of North Carolina, the former governor, he's standing for Senate. He's the best candidate, I think, for North Carolina. Anyway, this is a really crucial battle. So it's John Cornyn, who's been the senator since, I want to say, 2003, against the Attorney General Ken Paxton, who's been in that position since 2015. That's the GOP primary battle. Obviously, James Taylor, that's going to a runoff election, obviously, after it was very close in the actual primary. I want to say it was split by about 1%, kind of. I think about 46-45%. Wesley Adams, I think the other guy, Wesley Hunt was the other guy, and he only got about 20% of the vote. He was the kind of the other third candidate. And this is all going to decide who's going to have the chance to fight James Tallarico. He's a really promising state representative representing Texas's 30th congressional district in the Texas state representative system. He's a great candidate. He is kind of the ideal candidate for Democrats in Texas. He's got the Christian values, which is really important in Texas. He's got the kind of white guy kind of views, and that's probably a racist thing to say. Not racist, but it's kind of a more stereotypical thing to say. But in reality, you need that kind of outreach to win not just the cities that Democrats are good at winning in Texas, but also the areas kind of kind of East Texas, South Texas, a bit of the north, kind of towards Oklahoma. The West, they're already pretty good at winning at. There's one congressional district, kind of section, county, on the West that they're really good at winning, and that won't be a trouble, I don't think, for James Tallarico. But this shows a divide in the GOP between the kind of the MAGA candidate of Ken Paxton, it's a warning sign, kind of, that there's kind of a divide in the GOP between the MAGA candidate and the established kind of GOP. He's been there since 2003, he's been through Bush, Obama, first Trump, Biden, and then the second Trump. He's an enduring Republican. He's someone that's been there consistently over a long period of time, and he's not kind of fully kissing up to Trump's arse. Obviously he is, to an extent, but not fully. And I think it's really key. Obviously Trump would want Ken Paxton more than John Cornyn to win this race, but John Cornyn says that Ken Paxton's nomination will be the kiss of death to Republicans on the ticket, reflecting fears that a hardline MAGA candidate could lose a winnable Senate race. Paxton obviously denies these claims, obviously, of course he does. Personally, I think that John Cornyn will just have it. I think for some reason they're going to go for him instead of the kind of the MAGA candidate. John Cornyn's been there for a long time, he knows what he's doing, and in general people are reasonably happy with the way he's going, I think. And I think in general it's just a general kind of rebuke against Trump, against MAGA that we've seen. I think it's 20 odd seats we've seen lose to 28 reversal seats since Trump took office in 2025, and they don't want this to be another one, because somehow this has been becoming a key battleground state. We need to flip 4 Senate seats to regain control as Democrats, and it will determine the balance of power in Congress and signal whether Trump's kind of influence over the Republican-controlled Congress will stay, and whether he can influence this election enough, because obviously his endorsements always win. It tends to be, I think it's like 90% of the time his endorsements win, especially the primaries and also the elections. And I think that this really matters. It's the most important Senate race for sure. Also got some key ones in North Carolina, Georgia, Maine, places like Alaska and Nebraska as well, where we wouldn't think there'd be any kind of race between the Republicans and Democrats. Democrats have got some decent candidates in some of these places, but Texas is the most crucial place by far. This is so crucial for controlling the Senate. Now I want to move on quickly to the Iranian conflict. Obviously we've seen the Kharg Island oil terminal infrastructure has been destroyed by the US strikes. We've seen on TV, we've seen it everywhere, that those strikes have completely obliterated that island, it seems. And furthermore as well, Trump's saying he's going to send more troops to the region as well. And this matters because the rhetoric that's dominating the US news, affecting the global oil prices, his aggressive military moves are changing how our oil prices and how your money is going to be spent. your money is influenced by the 47th President of the United States across the pond in the UK, or by the person in a different state in America. You could be living in Nevada, and what he's doing is really affecting your oil price, even in kind of a Democrat-ish controlled state, especially now. Obviously, we've seen the Department of Homeland Security. There's been a reshuffle after Kristi Noem was sacked after a really poor committee appearance. There's a $220 million ad. There was a dog incident, which she wrote about in her book. I mean, there's so many things, but arguably it's been replaced by an even worse person. Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, he's the senator for Oklahoma. He didn't get any college degrees, he didn't got any proper qualifications. I think he's the only senator that doesn't have this stuff. He threatened to punch a guy during a Senate hearing. Bernie Sanders had to get in the way. The senator for Vermont, he had to get in the way. He was the chair, and there was this kind of oil executive, I think, or some kind of I can't remember who the executive was, and they threatened, and they tried to go at each other during a hearing. It was bizarre. 58% of Americans think the illegal immigration enforcement has gone too far. Now, bringing Mark Wayne Mullen in is kind of like saying we're going to get rid of this dog. We don't want to get a German Shepherd, but no, we're going to get a Husky. You've got rid of the dog, the problem you said, and then you've got an even worse problem that you've just built. And so that's an entire new thing, it's a main flashpoint, and that also will define the midterm election as well. You will see immigration be one of the leading topics that will be discussed, and kind of the ICE is many more important than immigration, especially in this. That will really define how this race has gone. Now I want to talk to you quickly about the US jobs shock. Now we've seen in the stats here, I'm going to have to read these stats out, some shocking stats regarding the US kind of jobs report and an unexpected downturn. And this isn't even including the Iranian strikes. That's all during March. This is April. We've seen down 92,000 jobs. We've seen unemployment rise to 4.4% again, which is crazy. This blew past expectations significantly. The economists forecast a 59,000 gain in jobs, and it's gone down 92,000. It's crazy. And this decline spanned many sectors, partly due to the healthcare strikes. Obviously, with the private healthcare system, if private shuts down, everything shuts down. And there's been strikes. There's a midwinter storm we've seen in New York. Zohran Mamdani has been trying to contain those. Another quick thing I want to discuss. Zohran Mamdani has incredibly high approval ratings. I want to say, since his election, his approval ratings have gone up 12, which is kind of unheard of in politics, especially New York politics as well, which I just want to quickly say. Economists worry the deteriorating labour market complicates the Fed's plan to cut raises. It's bad news whichever way you look at it, says a Fed watcher. And why this matters for you, if you're watching this in America, why this matters for your money. A soft landing economy, an economy that's declining, means that you're getting less bang for your buck. You're not paying as much. Your employment levels will really, your interest rates that the Fed will set will be, won't be cut, they might increase, it changes the way that your money is spent. It changes the way that you kind of spend your money and live your lives. All these kind of decisions, these kind of recession fears, these kind of healthcare strikes, everything that's happening, especially with this now Iran war, we can expect the economy to take a downturn. The tariff getting shut down, that kind of was a bit of the thing earlier in the year for the economy. But this is the second consecutive job loss month. You look at someone like Barack Obama, I think he had about 85 months of private sector job growth, job increases, wages growing, and this is the second consecutive job loss month, and it's not a one-off thing, these kind of 2 months, it's a constant. And that's really all we have time for on this US politics section. We're now going to go to the world section regarding the war developments, the US-China trade deal, the Nepal politics, we've got the Ukraine war, Zelensky's a bit unhappy with the deals, we've got a Myanmar civil war, we've got the Moscow, Putin's turn off the internet, we've got all that coming, so stay tuned. I also just remembered, it's a really important thing I've just remembered, about Chagos. So, Ted Kennedy introduced a new bill into the Senate. It's called the Diego Garcia Oversight Act, and it puts forward a proposal that would give Washington a full veto power over the treaty and any kind of transfer over sovereignty and any changes to the treaty that grants the UK and the US the right to use Diego Garcia. Any changes to sovereignty of that would require Senate consent on Diego Garcia, the joint US-UK trade base, a military base. Now, next we're going to discuss just the major global stories. This is the war developments, the US-China trade, the Nepal politics, everything that's kind of happened in the world in the last kind of month, week and a half, week-ish. We'll start with the smaller stories. America's refueling plane crashed in Iraq. There was a rescue mission underway to find survivors and recover the US KC-135 tanker, which went down in western Iraq and had 6 service members on board that were all killed. There was a second KC-135 that was in operation over Iraq, and that one survived, I think. I'm very certain that one survived. There was an Iranian drone strike, obviously, that threatened the Dubai financial district. We just heard loud kind of black smoke and clouds and kind of blasts about 7 AM on Friday. Dubai's International Finance Centre was badly damaged by the impact about 100 feet above ground. The UAE claims to have intercepted 1,800 drones and missiles since the war began, which has kind of helped defend Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, all these areas around, and this includes kind of Dubai airports, the city's port and its landmarks such as the Burj Al Arab Island, its financial district which we just mentioned, and the Jumeirah Island as well. Iran and Russia are accused of trying to hijack the global economy during these attacks, says Yvette Cooper, the UK Foreign Secretary. That's a really important point. And there's been sources that have said that the Israeli Defence Forces, more commonly known as the IDF obviously, as we know them, is now trying to buy time with the USA to make sure these strikes keep going, because there's a chance obviously after all this kind of stuff happens, a month from now, 2 months from now, we don't really know what's going to happen in the mind of Donald Trump, whether he's just going to give up at this or he's going to keep going. Benjamin Netanyahu has returned for the US to buy time in the US and make sure that this keeps happening. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is accused of trying to prolong war and not interested in peace whatsoever. That's one of the headlines. We also have another thing coming from Asia. This time it's Myanmar. So there's been a civil war there since about, I want to say it's December 2021, February 2021 I think it might be actually. At least 41 civilians were killed in what they call a kamikaze drone attack by the Myanmar military. So 41 civilians killed, including 18 children, following a week of aerial bombings by the country's military. So it's been abroad in a civil war since February 2021, obviously, when the military overthrew the democratically elected government led by the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. I can't remember his name. It's something like Aung San Suu Kyi or something. And the regime has killed at least 8,000 people in the last 5 years and arrested at least 36,000 other as political prisoners. And we'll end the short stories with this one. Chaos in Moscow as Putin turns off the internet for millions of people living in Moscow. So there's a lot of disgruntled people, and in and around Moscow I might say. So we've turned to pagers. We've seen a 73% rise in the sale of pagers since the outage has begun. Walkie-talkies, landline phones and paper maps. After more than a week of blackouts in the capital, which are reported to be ordered to happen by the Kremlin, by the state. Operators said they've been asked by authorities to limit mobile phone access in the capital. Putin blamed these shortages, however, on Ukrainian attacks and says that any kind of state-sponsored shutting down of these is not true, it's false, it's incorrect. So it's important to see what happens there in the next kind of week-ish. And then we have the more major stories. So the Middle East conflict widens. Obviously we've seen it go to Iran, Iraq, Dubai. We've seen it everywhere. We've seen the global oil prices surge. What we have seen as well is that there could be a potentially an open-ended kind of war that Europe have to take part in to keep America as an ally. Friedrich Merz says it's an endless war that's not in our interest. That's what the German Chancellor says. And it kind of will have global ramifications, not just for them, but for everybody around the world, even people not affected, African countries, kind of like Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, and even like other places that, like on Australia, New Zealand, Brazil, everywhere that's a major country, not a major country, that someone on the map is affected by this. Refugee flows even, we'll see a rise in refugees escaping Iran once again, which will have the whole kind of immigration thing, which will have reform back on their high horse. It's a wider confrontation again involving NATO and Russia. If Russia are backing the Iran missiles, drones, they're selling them to Iran the same way that China might be, the same way that all those kind of so-so nations might be doing stuff to Iran. It's a bit similar to kind of, we've seen that previously with Russia and North Korea supplying in Ukraine. And speaking on the topic of China, US and China are trying to do a trade summit before the Xi and Trump summit in mid-March. They're trying to get the trade chiefs together. So that's about buying Boeing jets. I think China plans to build about 500 Boeing jets for their kind of, I want to say it's a military, I think, or maybe it's just for their kind of state airline. I'm not really sure. There's 500 Boeing plane deal that they're looking for, easing restrictions on American soybean exports, obviously after the tariffs, a 30-day waiver on Russian oil sanctions, only months after criticising Moscow for doing this. So that's obviously happened because of this rise in oil prices. A US official on Boeing's trying to do, we will send him 500 airplanes. This is kind of a cautious baton, it's to improve the trade tie by boosting the markets, and it might help calm the tariff, calm the trade war, calm with the meeting. It might ease inflation for the opening Chinese markets on Monday. This has been filmed on Saturday night. But China's watchful because everything they're doing is affected by the Middle East, and they're trying to get a lot of its oil from the Straits of Hormuz. So I think it's also 20% of the world's oil comes from the Strait of Hormuz as well. So the Strait of Hormuz is a massive thing for the world, and how that will be affecting this kind of whole war is really, really important. It's all about oil. It's not so much about changing regime. It's also about how the oil and how we can kind of make sure that the world's natural resources can stay protected. I think that's everything I've got kind of for the world. Actually, no, there's Nepal. So in Kathmandu, the 35-year-old rapper-turned-politician Balendra Shah scored a historic landslide victory. So he was the mayor of Kathmandu for the last kind of 2-3 years. And it's a 3-year-old party. It won 182 of the 225 seats, the largest majority in over 60 years. Nepal tends to have a lot of coalition governments, and he ran on kind of anti-corruption, pro-jobs. It's kind of Gen Z protest, similar to kind of a campaign run by Zoran Mamdani or AOC, for example. That kind of getting young people voting, get young people into politics. And people are encouraged by the victory. It's a new moment because in a lot of these kind of not second world nations, but kind of newly emerging places, kind of low-income countries, they're stuck in political paralysis, and it's really important that there's change, that there's a long-term stability after kind of government instability. This government instability, kind of corruption, everything, but built into that is the kind of same ideas going around for the last kind of 50-odd years there. It's widely missed, this story, but it's significant actually to see whether a kind of rapper-turned politician, almost kind of like a Donald Trump kind of arc of someone that's not to do with politics, but has had political views, has come into power, obviously 35 years old, is no age to kind of run a country. Really interesting to see whether he can have some kind of impact on how this country is run. And that's the end of this world section. We're now going to go to the numbers of the week. Right, so we have the numbers of the week. Now we're going to start in the UK with this. UK polling is the number we're going to choose for this week to start. The latest YouGov voting intention poll shows that Reform are at 23%, so they're a tad down. Conservatives and Greens are tied 90%. It's been a good week for Conservatives, with a kind of good luck, and hoping up starting to build on some kind of momentum. At the start of her first year in opposition, she was a bit kind of shaky, I guess you could say, and not had some proper kind of stability. She was asking bad questions in PMQ. She wasn't properly kind of momentumising, I guess, and kind of asking the right questions, doing the right things, just trying to get kind of social media clips, is what she was trying to do. Greens was on the rise, 19%. Reform are down actually 23% now. Labour 17% and Lib Dem is 14%. It's the single largest party, obviously, Reform at the moment. It's kind of, if this vote shares apply, it's kind of a small majority government, tends to be there. Labour 17%, it's still woeful. They're still bad. Greens 90%, it's historic. Under Zach Polanski, it's really good for them. It's shown by the by-election, obviously. We saw there, but Manchester was always going to be Labour or Green, really. Reform never really had a chance, I don't feel. And they were just kind of there for the people that didn't feel they don't want to go Green, or they don't want to go Labour. But Reform never had the large majority of people in that constituency. Inflation in the UK was reduced to 3% in January, the lowest in a year, down from 3.4% in December. The core inflation is 3.1%, and the Bank of England futures are now priced at 90%, approximately 90% chance of a March rate cut. However, due to these energy costs spiking, with a 68% jump week on week, as I mentioned earlier, there is a high chance that this cut won't happen now and inflation will rise. 93% of Brits report higher food prices, 56% report higher overall living cost rises since the start of this year. And although the Bank of England is trying to ease inflation and the interest rates, I'm not entirely sure that there'll be enough to kind of even keep inflation. I can see it go back up to kind of 3.5% here, and nowhere near to the Bank of England's target of 2%. Let's talk about America. Obviously, we've seen the jobs down 92,000, unemployment 4.4%. The GDP growth in the fourth quarter of 2025 was 1.4%, so it's a tad under the Fed's targets there, which is mediocre at best. Trump's strike approval is 27%, so it's not doing great for him. These normally wars and conflicts are used before midterms, before an election, to get a boost into someone's polling figures, get some backing behind a leader. But this doesn't seem to happen. It seems like people have seen through it, so credit to people that have seen through it. And it seems like that's what's happened. Brits also as well, they don't particularly want this war to happen. They don't want to be involved, and Keir Starmer's played this well, but he hasn't managed to kind of get enough people to properly back him on not doing anything, because people have yo-yoed. Kind of said war, then not war, same with Nigel Farage, and he's kept the one clean position, and somehow he's still come out of this still not looking that great, so there you go. The US GDP growth, down 1.4% in the fourth quarter. That's down from 4.4% in the third quarter. So that's far exceeding the forecast in a bad way. US job gains were revised sharply lower, and average hourly earnings slipped significantly. This gives Democrats ammunition to highlight the economic uncertainty of Trump's economy. 62% of Americans disapprove of Trump's economy. That's a massive sign. 48% believe his policies are harming the economy, and 59% believe that his tariffs were the incorrect decision. So actually, in terms of tariffs, it's almost kind of 50-50, because there's also a narrative that the tariffs can help American business, but at the same time, for importers, it's not that great either. So it's kind of been a lottery for him on that issue, and we're now going to go to the winners and the losers of the week. Now, I know a short time to prepare these winners and losers, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly, because there's been a lot going on today. The winners, in my opinion, of the week: number one, the Green Party, obviously the by-election victory, and the increase in growing national support. I've Reform for leading the UK national polling, and the anti-immigration platform is obviously gaining traction, but also to a certain extent their polls are kind of plateauing at this point. And what you're starting to find now is almost kind of a bottleneck effect in Reform's figures, in which there's only a certain amount of people that can buy into this. And this is where Nigel Farage's party would tend to fail. There's been party disunity involved quite a lot. There's been kind of the party politics has not always done Nigel Farage well, because he's a one-man band kind of. And him trying to do a shadow cabinet was an example of him trying to build a bigger audience and a bigger group of people, because he's got 8-9 MPs in there now, and he thought doing 4 spokespeople would do well, but it turns out it hasn't highlighted anything, because it's just a bunch of failed Tories, and every one person on that stage has been at one point a member of the Tory party in some form, which really doesn't help Reform try and kind of build an anti-establishment image. And that's what we're starting to see. There's not enough talent from Reform. And furthermore, to add to Reform, we've seen the rise of tactical voting in the last couple of weeks and months, in which people are kind of pooling their votes for one candidate on the left, in particular, in terms of Independents, Labour, Green, Liberal Democrats, and even like nationalist parties like Plaid Cymru, Sinn Féin, etc., SNP, to stop Reform from getting it. And this has worked during elections in Caerphilly, a variety of by-elections. We've seen kind of local council levels. There was one thing I saw the other day in which it was Reform in Bolton, and there could have been a by-election not called if everybody had abstained. and they would have gone on like normal, but Reform said no, we want a by-election, and they spent money on it, and they spent loads of money. There's 3 by-elections, and Reform lost all 3 of them thanks to tactical voting. So well done to the Bolton Independents for winning that. Yeah, I mean, the tactical voting, if tactical voting occurs in the next general election at a kind of a national proper rate, then I can't see Reform getting that majority, and it probably still be a minority government, but it might not even be enough to kind of coalition with the Conservatives if tactical voting properly happens. So that's tough. Nigel Farage has tried to do a lot in the last week, to get the sectarian politics investigated properly. I think that is still being done by the Electoral Commission, so there might be some developments in that in the next kind of week or two. And finally, a quick one is what I mentioned earlier, the Rastriya Swantra party in Nepal, the shocking landslide for the young party of Balendra Shah. The undisputed winners, they are the first majority in decades. The governing skills are untested as a new party, that's understandable, but the volatility could unsettle this majority, or it could gain this majority and make it a really good government. It all depends on how they can effectively use their majority. If they can govern well in their first month, they can get support and the volatility will end. But what we do see with a lot of these parties, especially in kind of low-income countries, we see that they can't effectively kind of do well in these regions. Not in these regions, but kind of getting momentum to govern effectively. And then losers of the week, we have the Labour Party, bad week, national polls, slump and the by-election defeat exposed everything about them. The left-wing MPs openly ditched Starmer, they're trying to ape reform, with some of their immigration things. So Shabana Mahmood is taking a very hard-line stance on immigration. She's trying to win voters back from reform, and she's now losing more voters to the Greens, and then it's a net negative, I guess you could say. The net favourability as well, in a February YouGov survey, -57 is the net favourability rating, which is pretty shocking. Consider Donald Trump's is about -30, I want to say. That's really bad. Their allies argue that by-elections in polls can rebound. I can't see that happening if these scandals keep happening with McSweeney and Mandelson. And, there's always something. Every week there's something bad to write about. And you can't give the British media, especially with the way in which we are composed, with a right-wing bias in our media, you can't give them, as a Labour government, an opportunity to have any ammunition. And that's what the Labour government are doing week in, week out. And that's meaning that the cost of living is not being reported on as much. It means that the families aren't at the priorities because there's some kind of scandal. And you can say they're at the forefront in terms of the families and making sure that fuel prices are low, house prices are low, inflation down, interest rates down. But if you're stuck in a scandal and you're fighting off this, you can't advertise any good policies and nobody's going to trust you. So that's a little thing about the Labour Party. British households are losers from this because consumers and families are squeezed. Energy crisis costs soared. Wholesale gas, as I've already said multiple times, up 68% last week. 69% of adults reported higher gas bills. Retail footfall and spending dipped because disposable income has decreased, consumer confidence has decreased, market confidence decreased, business confidence has decreased in the last month or so, and that means that really Labour are now sitting ducks to attacks from all sides, from Greens, from Reform, from Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats, who tend to sit in the centre and just kind of go along with it, hence why they've seen such kind of neutral polling stats. They're starting to have a go back at Labour now, and it's in ambush from every single angle for the Labour Party. And finally, the US labour market, big losers, as I've said, job losses, they've shed jobs, unemployment rate up, war-driven oil and tariffs making economy stagnate. Wages are still growing by about 0.3%, so it's below inflation, so effectively your wages are still decreasing. 7% of Americans think prices are falling. 7%, and bear in mind a lot of those people are Republicans as well, and they're still not feeling that. They might still feel pro-Trump, but it's not great. Streak of straight months of job growth broken. The Fed and politicians are uneasy, and that leads us nicely into predictions for next week to see what's going to happen with these developments. Let's go to predictions of the week. So my quick 5 predictions for next week, again I don't have much time to do these, and I've given some kind of rough percentages to these. I'm going to start at number 5. There is a very high chance that we will see major anti-war protests across Europe, mainly from left-wing groups supporting Palestine and supporting anti-war kind of, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil kind of people that kind of will cause a disruption to make sure that you know about all this stuff when you're going out and about to these kind of places, in particularly France, Germany, the UK. You'll see large demonstrations by these peace activists. It could even be a strike. 85% of Italians are expected to join peace calls. And the probability of this happening is quite high. Another prediction of mine as well is I think there'll be obviously a UN ceasefire vote on the Middle Eastern conflict. I think there's kind of a 60-40 chance of that happening. There'll be a kind of draft resolution. It'll be backed by the Arab states. It may pass with abstentions from the US and Israel, etc. And it will come to a vote, obviously. Gulf countries and Turkey have pressed for a halt to this, but some of the nations that aren't as much affected in terms of people and land and actual resources probably will abstain or say no to a ceasefire because they're not truly affected, and if anything, they might be benefiting because people might not be buying Iranian oil, they're buying a different country's oil. That's why we've seen Russia have benefited kind of from this because there's less attention on them in Ukraine. They can still supply to Iran, they can get their oil for a more expensive price and more people are going to want to buy it, so it's win-win-win, and they've had sanctions lifted. So for Russia it's all perfect. The US-China trade deal edges closer. There's about 60% chance of that happening. I mentioned that earlier ahead of Trump's visit to Beijing. Negotiators are in Paris trying to progress through this Boeing deal, etc. To be honest, for the Chinese people, I would not want to buy Boeings considering their record on crashes at the moment. I'd say there's about an 80% chance that the Federal Reserve keeps interest rates unchanged despite these figures that the US data I showed you, the slow inflation but the weak jobs. I think that they'll keep it unchanged. It might go down a tad with the rates, maybe turn it a bit up, sorry. The Iran conflict will affect it and they will hold the Fed funds rate probably between 3.5% to 4%. And finally, the UK energy subsidy will be announced. I think it's a 90% chance the rate tariffs will unfurl targeted relief, kind of like the warm home bill, the warm home discount or bill credits for the low income households that have been affected a lot by these rising oil prices, these rising gas prices, all these rising prices in general will be affected greatly because it's affecting the weakest in our societies and it's being fought by people that have money and have the power, and so that needs to stop. And we end here with a story that everybody missed, and this story I think is really incredible story in the sense that there's been a change in Florida. So there was a mayor election in Boca Raton, I think that's how you say that, in Florida, and it's just half an hour south of Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump's Florida resort, and it has now a Democratic mayor. They flipped a GOP stronghold. Annie Thompson was declared the winner after 3 recounts due to extremely narrow margins. Originally it was announced as a 1 vote difference, literally 1 vote. Then it was recounted and it was agreed to be just 5 votes. So Annie Thompson, the winner, Democrat, 7,572 votes. There was 2 Republicans on the ballot. There was 2 Republicans fighting for it against each other. And in the end they've split the vote. Mike Liebelson, 7,567 votes, and Fran Neklaus, 3,967 votes as a Republican. Without that split vote, you've got 11,000 there, you're winning. But that's another review call. On Thursday, we also saw Democrat Bobby Badman beat a Republican for a seat in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, making the 28th such reversal since Donald Trump took office in 2025. That is crazy, considering there hasn't been any major... The midterms haven't happened yet. We saw, in 2025, we saw our November elections for governors and for mayor of New York, but they were already Democrat places, so that doesn't even count as a reversal. There's been 28 reversals since he took office. That's a crazy statistic to have in your first, not year in office, just over a year in office. That's a crazy step. But now we're going to close the ministerial folder and say thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode, as a matter of fact. This is the first episode, so it's tough to gain proper momentum and kind of have a well-flowing dialogue and tone, but that will be worked out over time. So stay tuned, keep listening to it in your kitchen, in your car, in the gym, wherever you're listening to this podcast or watching it, wherever you are. But keep watching it, keep supporting this. Make sure you leave any likes, comments, subscribes down below, in particular the comments as well. We will be making shorter podcasts in the future. I understand it's been a bit longer, but just trying to understand this and kind of get starting a new thing, I guess. But after the missed story, we're going to be doing responses to comments and anything else on these podcasts. So make sure you put any comments and replies down in the description below about any issues we discussed today, about any questions you have about any of these policies, about any video ideas. Make sure you put them down in the comment section below, and they will all be answered on these videos, on these podcasts, wherever you are listening around the world. But we'll have a couple of explainers coming. We've got the midterms, previews and predictions coming, going through state by state, the chances, etc. And so there's a lot to look forward to on Next Gen Politics. But for now, it's bye-bye.